G'day guys, welcome back to a new episode of the Boundary Riders podcast, episode 104. And of course, with round one approaching, we have a lot to talk about today. Some new signings that have been announced across at Essendon, some tragic injury news to cover, Collingwood getting away with what seems to be a little bit of favouritism in my opinion, and so much more. So let's not waste any more of your time. Let's roll the intro and get straight into it. Welcome to the Boundary Riders podcast, your one-stop shop for all your AFL content needs.
He looks at his options, and Jack Ginnivan says, boys, you brought me to the club to do justice!
But this guy has Flog written all over him.
From a tack down, Reed sprints away from Petrarca, leaves him in his wake, takes a second bounce, takes a third. The sheer arrogance of Harley Reid. Finish the job, young man!
So let's get into the footy news from the week that was. So guys, of course, as you can tell, my brother is not here today. I think this is the first episode he's missed since episode 101, I think it was. So he's been in for a couple of weeks, but I've decided to drop him. He was kind of lagging behind, and you know what? It's round one, so we have to get the big guns in. Me. But anyway, no, he had work, I think, or something. So that's all right. I'll carry the podcast today as usual. And just before we get into the full podcast, as you can see down below, last chance, join the AFL tipping comp, join the AFL fantasy comp. We've got about 100 people in between both of the competitions, which is really exciting. So if you haven't already, links are down below, or just follow the code for the AFL fantasy, and the instructions for all that are down below. So get excited, join everything that I asked, because if you haven't, you can't have a chance to win a $100 gift voucher to the AFL store. I know it's such a massive prize. I can't believe I'm going to actually survive eating that week if I can't afford a $100 gift voucher to each of those stores, but each gift card. But anyway, let's get into the episode. So we'll cover some news topics before we get into the major stuff that I wanted to talk about. So some news that rolled out today. Essendon have re-signed Brad Scott. So they've extended his contract to lead Essendon until 2027. I thought this was quite interesting because he hasn't really done much. Now, I'm not saying that he's not going to be a great coach or he's not been a decent coach for Essendon so far, but he hasn't got him to finals yet. They haven't done a lot, Essendon, so I was a bit surprised that Essendon was so keen to re-sign him. And I'm very interested to see how Essendon go this season, because we'll get to a little bit of injury news later. But yeah, Peter Wright has been ruled out indefinitely with injury now, so they're going to have to really heavily rely on players like Kako and Caddy up forward, which, you know, I mean, good to see some young kids playing for the Bombers, but to have to rely on these guys for goals this season, it's going to be very tough, considering they already lost Stringer, who was the highest goal kicker last year. Cole Langford's still a great player, but who else is going to kick their goals? I'm going to be very interested to see, because you can't rely on a guy who's a first-year player and a second-year player to kick, if they can kick 20 plus goals each, I think that's a pass mark for a first-year player. So, I mean, if they get more than that, that's just bonus, but I don't really know what Essendon are going to be able to do with that. I think the fact that I put them in 17th, I think that's very well. I can't see that happening. I don't know how that happened in my ladder predictor, because I predicted every single game. Wasn't really like I was picking on like what my feeling was towards the games, not so much like, I've got Essendon a bit low, I better put them up a bit more to make people feel better. So, but then when looking at it, I was like, how the hell are they going to finish 17th? I'd be very surprised if that happens. So we'll see what happens. They're a real conundrum for me. I don't really know where the Bombers are going to finish, but we'll just have to wait and see. Let's move on to some injury news, and tragic story here. Just came out today as I'm recording on Tuesday. Lincoln McCarthy has yet again ruptured his ACL. He played in the practice match against the Crows. I thought maybe he was on the comeback trail, but unfortunately he has done another one. He's out indefinitely. I'd expect it's going to be another 12-month injury. Really unfortunate for Lincoln McCarthy. Played in that 2023 grand final. Missed out, of course, on the premiership by 5 points. Had to sit on the sidelines, watch his teammates win a grand final in 2024. And now in 2025, they're expected to do big things as well again, the Lions. And unfortunately, he's going to have to sit on the sidelines again. So tragic for Lincoln McCarthy. You feel really sorry for him. Brisbane will get around him. Hopefully he can return at some point, but it's looking a lot more unlikely, the fact that he's going to be able to return to football, in my opinion, just because he had a lot of injuries before he went to Brisbane when he was at the Cats. I think he only played like 30 or 40 games. Finally got some consistency in his football career, and now, unfortunately, he's just going to have to bide his time for another 12 months, and hopefully he can find his way back, because he is a very important player for Brisbane, and I think he's a very underrated small forward, but I guess only time will tell. On other injury news, I'm sure a lot of Port Adelaide supporters saw this, but in case you did miss it, There was a huge scare that went through Port Adelaide over the weekend with Connor Rosie in a match simulation with teammates. Jason Horne-Francis laid one of the most it wasn't a bone-crunching tackle, but look, I'm going to be honest, Jason, if you're listening, don't tackle your captain in any sort of vigor. Like, just tap him on the butt as he goes past, all right? Don't need to do a bone-crunching tackle and nearly injure his toe. Now, luckily, all reports seem to be that he'll be fine for round 1, Connor Rosie, which is great news, but just heart in your throat kind of stuff for Port Adelaide fans. I mean, you've already lost Zach Butters for the first month or so of the season. You don't need to go and do something else like this. Let's just keep the bone-crunching tackles, even just soft tackles to round 1. Leave them alone. So that is good news for Port Adelaide, but it was very scary for a moment, I'm sure. My brother was very concerned about that. And on James Worpel, he did get injured in the opening round contest against the Swans. He was out at half-time with an ankle concern. There was a couple of issues. People were thinking maybe this could be similar to Errol Goulding's because he did get his ankle caught in a tackle. Good news is the fact that it's not too serious. He will miss the next 3 to 4 weeks, James Worpel, but it's not long-term like Errol Goulding. So good news for Hawthorn fans. Now, opening round as a whole, let's talk about it because I think most people are pretty well set now that it's been that version of opening round was an absolute disaster. And I know a lot of it didn't have to do with the AFL, but the fact there was only 2 games on the weekend was very much AFL's, sort of back. They've got to fix it up. They've got to do something else. If they're going to do opening round, I think the concept can work, but they've got to stop trying to we've got to compete with the NRL. Like, the way they brought it in originally was to try and compete with the fact that they're going to Vegas, so we're going to go on their territory and then try and take over in Sydney and Brisbane, which didn't work at all. And this time, it didn't work. It was even worse because there was only 2 games, and the Queensland teams, and now the fixture is completely staffed. The ladder means it doesn't mean nothing, but it's going to be messed up for the entire year because the Essendon Gold Coast game that was supposed to be played in opening round is not going to be done until round 24 at the end of the year. That could either be one of the better games to watch with a lot of riding on it as like a standalone game, or it's going to mean absolutely nothing and no one's going to watch it, and there's no point televising it if neither of the teams are in for a finals contention. So it doesn't mean much. It could mean everything or it could mean nothing. We don't know. And the rest of the season, the ladder is going to be lopsided. It's going to be awkward because 2 teams aren't going to have a game. Anyway, so I think Michael Voss made a very interesting point about a way to implement opening round that could be beneficial for the AFL. So this was posted on 3AW in Melbourne. I just wanted to play this clip quickly and see what I want to give my perspective on it.
Just right, but Michael Voss had a different take on the national game and what he would do with this round.
Yeah, I haven't been a great fan of it. I tend to think it's, something what makes us a little bit different is, that we've got a national game, and I don't see why we don't advertise it launch it in every single state. And everyone's got their own concept. I guess my concept is probably to, if we were to play a game in every state, WA, there's two games we can play there. 2 games we can play in South Australia, 2 games we get to play in Queensland, New South Wales, and also launch it in Victoria. And we've got 10 Victorian teams, 8 could go travel to every single state. We could have 2 games in every state.
I agree. I think that this is a great idea. If you're going to have an opening round, I don't think it should just be, we should just do it for New South Wales and for Queensland. I think that's just ridiculous. The fact that the game is a national game, it should be broadcasted to a national scale. To just lock it to 2 states to try and capitalise on the rugby market is not going to work. I think that the interstate clubs in those states are doing very well for themselves. The Giants are really growing a younger fan base with their stuff online, and the fact that they're being quite successful too is really growing. Sydney, of course, have already got a good market there, the Sydney Swans, because of how successful they have been in the past. Brisbane, winning the premiership recently, they're growing fans by the week, by the month, by the year. Membership numbers are continuing to grow, and if they fucking redevelop that bloody shithole of a Gabba, maybe they'll get even more fans to their games, who knows. The Gold Coast are the concern though, and that's not going to be helped by opening round. The Gold Coast need to be more successful on the field to then grow a brand there for themselves, because the way they're sitting at the moment, they're not going to grow because of opening round. And I don't think it's going to grow the game as much as what the AFL seem to broadcast that it's going to be. Just because the crowds are up a little bit doesn't mean a lot when, like, the crowds are up in opening round. It doesn't mean a lot when they're getting a lot of Victorian teams to them and they're standalone games. People are just happy to watch football again, like football fans. But to get new fans there, you need to, I think, a very similar way is to do it like Michael Voss said. Play interstate, every single Victorian club except for two. Either pick, I would pick, and I know this may be a little bit annoying to people saying, oh, it's unfair because these are the big Victorian clubs, but I think the way to get it underway is to get the biggest Victorian clubs to stay in Victoria, whether that be Collingwood, Carlton be the season opener, Essendon and Hawthorn as another game. The rest of the Victorian clubs go elsewhere. I think that's just more than fair. Then we get a game in every single state. We have a Thursday night game, we have a Friday night game, we have Saturday games, we have Sunday games. No one wants the way it is at the moment. I don't think even Queensland and New South Wales would really like it the way it is. I think that the way you can grow the game to like a market like that is, I wouldn't have another gather round. I think that's not a good idea. I think the way the gather round is being in South Australia is a good idea, and it's a nice, I wouldn't say a gimmick because it's not, I think it's bigger than that, but it's like the football festival, but have a round around some point in the year when there's school holidays, have a point where a Collingwood or a Carlton or a couple of big Victorian clubs will play games in the Queensland or in Sydney for 2 weeks. I think that'd be a way to do it. You get Carlton to play against the Gold Coast 1 week, Brisbane the other week, Sydney, and then Collingwood have to play Sydney 1 week, GWS the other week in New South Wales to then get those supporters to go over there. And that's a way you could do it. I think that's a way that would be growing the game out into those other states rather than trying to lock in a half a round or, like we saw, a quarter of a round to this position. And then not only that, but then the rest of the first 6 weeks are very confusing for ladder positions. Teams get a lot more of an advantage having that extra game of match fitness. It's going to be very interesting to see if the team coming off that, not having a game of experience yet, play worse or if they're better off for it. I think that's another problem with opening round, giving other teams more of an advantage because they've had a week off. But let's move on. And speaking of Collingwood, we might as well get to this point. If you missed it on the weekend in the one of the two games, GWS beat up on Collingwood in the second half, ran away with it. The big talking point from the game was Nick Dacos and the fact that he cramped up in the third quarter and really had no impact after that point. He was getting tagged by Toby Bedford from the Giants. When he came off the ground at one point, Nick Dacos, Craig McRae on the bench, yelled across at Toby Bedford and said a bunch of words. I don't think it was too severe, I'm going to be honest. I don't think it was. But Adam Kingsley stood up and made him sit down at that point. And it's been very funny. A lot of memes have been saying like, oh, Craig better sit down before he gets himself flogged by big bicep Adam Kingsley. All that sort of bullshit. Anyway, this brings us to our Flog of the Week. Of course, the Flog of the Week, we've had a couple of nominations already this year. Most of them have been circulating around journalists. And the AFL got one last week for their delayed announcement of the games being postponed. This week, it's going straight to Craig McRae because the fact that he's sitting there, he's been very much a bit of a sook the last, I would say, almost 6 to 12 months. Since he was the happy-go-lucky coach in his first year, when they won the premiership in their second year, he was the, happy coach. But since then, he's been turning a little bit. He had a cup, I think it was last year when they played the Swans. They said they would have won the game if it wasn't for the fact, if it was played in Melbourne. Instead of just realising that they had a chance to beat Sydney in that game. They had a 26-point lead, I think, in the last quarter against Sydney. This was late in the year and they choked it. Instead of acknowledging that, he made an excuse. And now this, he's done some other stuff as well. But it's not a very good look, I'm going to be honest. And this is going to be the Flog of the Week nomination for this week is Craig McRae. The fact that teams are going to tag Nick Dacos, that's going to happen. And as a coach, you either need to find a way to negate that, whether that be send Nick Dacos forward, chuck him at half back, do something rather than just let him sit there and suffer that tag for the rest of the game and then crack a whinge when he's coming off the ground and yelling at the other opponent's player. We don't like that whatsoever. You don't need to do it. I think as well, this could be given to the AFL for not giving him a fine. What happened was, in the aftermath, the AFL came out and said that Craig McRae just had to do a please explain. No fine was given, which I think is ridiculous. I don't think that it was a massive deal, but if you're going to hand down a fine to Ken Hinckley for, having a go at a player in a semi-final, you should be giving it to Craig McRae as well. Because I don't think it's as bad as what Ken Hinckley did. Not that I think that Ken Hinckley did necessarily a shocking thing. It's really bad, but he probably shouldn't have done it. But you can't set the standard of saying we don't want coaches to be antagonising or getting angry at or getting upset at players on opposition teams and getting into arguments. You can't set that precedent, and then when Craig McRae does it, you say, "Oh, that's fine. Just don't do it again." No, you can't give Ken Hinckley a $20,000 fine and then Craig McRae gets nothing. That's crap. That is, I don't like to bring up the Collingwood favouritism because I think a lot of people bring it up and just half the time for no particular reason. But this just reeks of it. And I think that most people have that same sentiment. It's just bullshit, really. I think he should have been fined. I'm not saying he should have even been fined as much as Ken Hinckley. I think he should have been given at least a reprimand for a fine or that point. Because if it was, I don't want to bring up Kane Corns' arguments because I know a lot of people just tune out. But he made a decent point of saying if this was a person like Alistair Clarkson or if it was Ken Hinckley, this would be a lot more of a talking point. But because it's Craig McRae, he has he sat in pretty high standards of like being the happy-go-lucky coach that he just gets away with it. That's bullshit. And Craig McRae does get the flog of the week this week, but the AFL get a little caveat to that. They add on to that because they should have given him a reprimand. And then as well, the AFL are using this Ken Hinckley against Hawthorn situation as marketing for Gather Round. So you can't punish someone and then use them for marketing as well. I think that's just ridiculous, the way that that's been sorted out. And now with Craig McRae, they've just let him get away with it, basically. We'll see if it happens again. But I think I'll tell you one thing right now. Every single team this year should be going to Nick Dacos and tagging him because he's one of the few Collingwood players who bring some sort of run to their game. And he was negated against GWS and the Giants just ran rings around them. So we'll see how the rest of the season goes. No club should ever be scared of tagging him because of a Craig McRae insult. Because if you've got a coach like Adam Kingsley at the helm, he'll just put you down in your seat pretty quickly. But yeah, the flog of the week this week is Craig McRae for having a whinge about this sort of stuff, acting like a bit of a child, considering you have one of the best players in the game. Some teams are going to try and negate that by tagging them out of the game, which the Giants did brilliantly. So they deserve a lot of credit for it. But that's the end of that one. So we'll move on to the Geelong Cats because apparently they're under investigation by the AFL. People are saying they're getting audited. They're going to get caught, guys. It's all over. Geelong are done for. It's all over, guys. Geelong are done. Let's just put a little bit of a pin on that just for a moment. Fox Footy came out with a post a couple of days ago saying the AFL is auditing Geelong over third-party player payments according to a veteran journalist. Now, I believe this is Caroline Wilson, who was one of the big journalists coming up with this story. Geelong have been suspected for quite a while of giving third-party payments. Not recent, but I think the most recent team or player to have been caught getting these third-party payments was Chris Judd back when he went and joined Carlton. He was getting paid with something to do with Vizzy. I think a lot of people agree that Chris Judd has a very big passion for cardboard and cardboard boxes. So I think that was a pretty legitimate contract extension there. So a caveat to it, getting an extra part of pay, I think that was more than fair enough. I mean, I have a pretty big fascination with cardboard, so I can see where Chris Judd was coming from, just wanting to have a little bit more incentive to... I can't even fuck around with this anymore. That was just ridiculous. But anyway, Geelong have been suspected of doing this, considering they've been able to pick up so many players in the past, and I mean, they were linked to players in the off-season as well, like Clayton Oliver, but also having Bailey Smith, having Patrick Dangerfield, Jeremy Cameron. They've got so many great players. You've got to expect where is all this money coming from. So that's where people's suspicions lie. However, Tom Morris, I mean, take this with a grain of salt because it is Tom Morris, but he did come out and say that, giving a little bit more context to this situation. So he came out with a tweet saying, the AFL audits 2 clubs per year. This year, it's Geelong and Port Adelaide. They also audit about 4 other clubs varying levels throughout the season. Clubs are always sceptical of rivals. Example is St Kilda and Hawthorn were of each other during last year's Josh Battle move. Whether the skepticism is justified on the Cats, time will tell in the coming months. So look, it may well come out that the Cats are, fudging the books a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised, but we'll just have to wait and see what happens because they're not allowed to do it, like give these sort of third-party payments with like the Chris Judd situation. A lot of people are suspecting that the reason why Bailey Smith moved to the Cats was because he has a pretty big deal or something with Cotton On, which is Geelong's clothing brand or whatever they call it, their merchandise brand. So that's where a lot of the intrigue lies, sort of speculation sits with right now. I actually would be a little bit surprised if the Cats are caught doing something here because I think there would be so much backlash against them for doing it. I think a lot of the reasoning for the Cats getting these players is because they can pay them on a little bit less money because of their success and players want to join to get premierships and all that sort of stuff. I think that's where a lot of it will lie. However, there's got to be something to answer for the fact that they've been able to get so many players in the past. So wait and see what happens. I don't think there's a huge conspiracy theory behind this. I think that there's a little bit of speculation. People are like, how do they do that? But I think that it sits with the fact that the Cats are a very successful team. It's very easy to market yourself as a successful team. Come down to Geelong. You don't have as much media scrutiny because you are not in the heart of Melbourne. You're an hour away in Geelong. It's a very nice area. Well, some people think it's a nice area anyway. Depends on where you're staying in Geelong. But you know what I'm saying. Like, it's a lot less. It's outside of the Melbourne bubble, but you're still a part of Victoria. You're still a part of a big club, and you're a part of a very successful club. One of the most successful clubs the last 20 years. So I think that's how they can get a player to come down without having to pay them excess amount. I think that's how I would see it. I would be a little bit surprised if the Cats are doing something shady, but they could well be. But guys, with that being said, it's time to preview round 1. Now, we have already done the tips, so I will just play the clip of the tips for round 1. So, like I said, join the tipping comp as well. I left it open for an extra week because there was only 2 games in the opening round, but from Thursday night, the tipping comp will be closed. But now let's get into the tips and the preview for round 1. So let's get into our first big game of the weekend. It is Hawthorn up against Essendon on Friday night. Essendon, of course, missing last week with their postponed game, and Hawthorn running out winners against Sydney. It sets up for an interesting contest. Essendon had a couple of very exciting pre-season games. Kako and Caddy seem to be the new forward duo for Essendon, which is really exciting. Hawthorn, what a performance by Will Day. He's the best player on the ground, I thought. I picked him for the 3 votes in the Boundary Riders medal, of course, if you watch the review. And this one sets up for an interesting contest. So a couple of questions on either team that I'll be going through today. On Hawthorn's side, can they back up that great performance they had against Sydney last week? It was a very tough game, very warm conditions in Sydney. Can Hawthorn back that up with a game in round 1? And on Essendon's point of view, can they find a way to score? It seems at the moment they're already heavily relying on Kako, yet to play a game, and Caddy played under 15 games of footy. They're relying heavily on them two to kick their goals going into this season. Can they find a way to kick a winning score? So, in the end, I have tipped Hawthorn for this game. I think the defence was absolutely insane against Sydney last week. Intercepted most of Sydney's pushes forward, which is going to be a lot easier, I believe, against Essendon with a lesser forward line. Hawthorn's midfield was brilliant. I mean, even when James Worpel went down at half-time, Will Day was, like I said, was the best player on the ground. Such great talking points about him going into the rest of the season. Now, James Sicily as well, moving from back to forward. Being so flexible, Hawthorn now with their positional changes. And the thing is that a lot of people are talking about how Ginnivan and Watson played very poorly. I think that's not the worst thing in the world. I mean, if they can just find their form coming into the season now, the fact that they dominated against the grand finalists last year, and they didn't even have some of their better players perform well, if they can perform well in the coming weeks, I mean, how scary is Hawthorn going to look? So I'm picking Hawthorn to win this one. After that, we get to a Saturday afternoon, Geelong versus Fremantle I want to talk about. This is a very interesting game. It is down in Geelong, so I think that does give the Cats a little bit of an advantage. However, Fremantle don't actually really have the worst record down there. They won there last year, and of course everyone remembers the first final that Geelong had down there in as many years. They lost to Fremantle, and Freo went on to go and make the grand final that year. That was obviously a long time ago, but more recent history, Fremantle won there last time. Now, I think the question marks on this game, the new recruits on either side. You've got Bailey Smith from Geelong, Shea Bolton for the Dockers, are the headline acts. Can they both live up to the hype? Bailey Smith is coming off a long-term injury, so it'll be very interesting to see how he performs on the weekend. And Shea Bolton was a massive player for Richmond. I think he's going to be predominantly forward this year for the Dockers, occasionally pinch hit in the midfield, which I think is a good sign. Can they live up to the hype? That's the question I've got for this game. On Fremantle, they do have a decent record down there. Can they continue that going into round one? If they can win their first game of the season and send Geelong with a 0-1 start, I think that'd be a great start for the Dockers season. But the problem with Fremantle is the fact that they've got quite a few players out. You're headlined by Young and Darcy. Still some question marks on a few others, mainly Alex Pearce. If he is out, I can't see a world where Fremantle win this game. But if he is in, I give them a chance. However, no matter what, I am going to be tipping Geelong. I think down in the Cattery to start the season, I think the fact they didn't have to go to Brisbane last week just gives them another extra week of prep time. I'm picking the Cats to win this one by a couple of goals. I think it's going to be one of the games of the round though, so keep your eye out on Geelong and Fremantle. After that, we get to the grand final rematch. The Swans up against Brisbane. And what an interesting contest this sets up to be. The Swans 0-1. A lot of people are talking about the fact they could be 0-3 before their bye. So Sydney have got a couple of question marks. They had a good performance against Hawthorn without being great. There's still a couple of question marks on that forward line in my opinion. And the one thing that Sydney have to do is they have to lock away Brisbane's chance of uncontested marks. That grand final was gone by half time because Sydney just let them kick mark around the ground. I think they had 80 uncontested marks or something by half time, and that's usually what teams have at the end of a game. That's a pretty good performance. So to leave that to half-time, no defensive pressure, wasn't good enough. And there was some things that I saw in the Swans game against Hawthorn on the weekend that I wasn't really a fan of. The fact that Sydney let Hawthorn intercept mark in that first half way too easily was not a good sign. The big reason why they moved Tom McCartan up there is because he's a competitor, and him and Joel Amati let the ball be marked by those key defenders way too easily. So Sydney have to find a way to bring the ball to ground to get players like Hapley involved, Hayward involved, and even Tom Hanley, who came on as the sub. He shows some good signs, but he can't do much if the ball's being marked by a key defender. If they're going to persist with McCartan up forward, they have to bring the ball to ground and compete. And on Brisbane, I don't think there's a lot of question marks, except for the fact that a lot of off-field distractions this week for Brisbane. It's going to be hard to get them back in line. I mean, we saw players like Lachie Neale in an interview last week talk about the fact that he was not even going to play if the game was relocated throughout the week, which I mean is more than fair. I mean, he's got to think about his family. You know, it's only going to be a week later, not even that. People are still, you know, having to deal with the aftermath of Cyclone Alfred. So can they put that aside, get back to the game at hand, and can they perform well? I think they can. I think Brisbane will win this one. Down at the SCG, again, they have a good record against the Swans. I think they've won their last 3. Hasn't had too many issues at the SCG either. And I think that having that week off's not going to be too bad for them. And I think the Swans had a tough game against Hawthorn in their first battle. Can they back that up next week? I'm not too sure. So that's hence why I'm going with the Brisbane Lion.
But before we go any further, a message from me. If you guys enjoy the content and you want to see more, then make sure to become a member on the channel today. For just $4 a month, you can get early access to video essays, access to live recording to the Boundary Riders podcast, along with exclusive stream perks and much more. And something that I'm super excited to introduce to channel membership this year is the members vote. Every week with the review, you can cast your vote to have your say on the Boundary Riders medal. So for all that and more, click the link down below, and for the added bonus of getting an extra inch onto your member, then do it now. But anyway, let's get back into the content.
And then finally, Collingwood v Port Adelaide. Can Collingwood respond after a very disappointing performance against the Giants on the weekend? And can Collingwood keep their solid record intact against Port Adelaide? They have a very good record against them. And looking at the power, can they run the Pies off their feet? We saw how well the Giants did it on the weekend, especially in the second half. If Port Adelaide can get this game out in the open, I think the Port Adelaide can win this game pretty easily in the end. We saw how Collingwood struggled when GWS got it on outer circle of a stoppage or just got it into open space. They really struggle. If Port Adelaide can get this ball on the outside, I give them every chance of winning this game. Now, there is a bit of an injury concern to Connor Rosie. If he's out, right off, Port Adelaide have any chance of winning this game. But on Collingwood's point of view, the fact that they had players cramping that early in the game, like midway through the third quarter, like, look, I'm not one to talk about fitness, but I'm not an AFL player. The fact that they had players going down midway through the third quarter with cramp, and then multiple players were out of the game through cramp, like later in the game,
shows that they weren't really prepared for that first game. Port Adelaide do come with a bit of fire in their belly. I do give Port Adelaide a chance. However, I'm going to go with Collingwood. I think they've received a lot of scrutiny this week. I think they're a team that will respond, and I think that was one of the more poor performances we've seen from Collingwood in the last 18 months. So I can't see them doing that 2 weeks in a row. That's why I'm going with Collingwood, and also I still think with a little bit of doubt on Connor Rosie, I think that Port Adelaide are going to struggle a bit in this game. But like I said, if they can get this ball on the outside, get the ball in motion a lot more, Port, then I give them actually a chance of winning this game, sending Collingwood to 0-2. So with that being said, let's get to our full tips for the weekend. So my tips for round 1 are Carlton, Hawthorn, Geelong, Brisbane, Western Bulldogs, Collingwood, Adelaide, GWS and West Coast. And my brother's tips for round 1, Carlton, Hawthorn, Geelong, Brisbane, Western Bulldogs, Collingwood, Adelaide, GWS and the Gold Coast. So me and my brother have only got one tip different this week. He has tipped the Gold Coast Suns. I have tipped West Coast in the final game. Of course, we have the certainty pick. Now, if you missed it last week, every single week of the season, me and my brother are going to be picking a tip for the round that is our certainty pick. We think that this can't be defeated. This is not good. There's no way in hell we can see an upset coming here. Now, the way the certainty pick will work is for the first couple of rounds of the season, the certainty pick team that we pick from had to have finished lower than their opponent on the ladder in 2024. For the rest of the season, the team that we pick for a certainty pick had to have lost the previous week. So it's kind of hard to do that in the first couple of rounds. That's why we've done that for the first few rounds, picking from ladder positions from 2024. But in future rounds, it will be our certainty pick team has to have lost the previous week to make it a little bit harder for everyone. At the end of the season, the punishment for the amount of wrong certainty tips me and my brother get will be the amount of chilies that we have to eat in the BR Awards live stream at the end of the season. So the BR Awards, you guys know what it is. Well, in case you don't, we will be giving away the Boundary Riders medal at the end of the year, the player who gets the most amount of votes from the review, and we do a bunch of other awards as well. We've got the Goal of the Year from the channel, the Mark of the Year, we announced the Tipping Comp winner, the Fantasy Comp winner, we may have a couple of other awards as well, hint hint, who knows, but that's basically how we're going to do it. And last week, me and my brother picked the certainty pick of Collingwood beating the Giants, so we've already got one chili on the board for both of us, so that's not very good at all. Now, in future rounds as well, me and my brother can't pick the same team for the certainty tip either. So he will have to pick someone different this week. So my certainty pick for round 1 is the Adelaide Crows to beat the Saints. And my brother's certainty tip for round 1 is Collingwood to beat Port Adelaide. And finally, guys, the stream for this weekend, of course, Thursday night, Richmond v Carlton. So every single week this season, we're going to be doing a live stream for the Thursday night contest. Of course, the opening round, we had the game postponed, so we did the Friday night game against Sydney and Hawthorn. But as long as you don't see any other Cyclones, we should be doing Thursday night from now on. So of course, round 1 stream is Richmond v Carlton. But guys, just quickly, we did leave the tipping comp open for an extra week, just so we could have other people join, because it was only 2 tips. But the tipping comp will be closed on Thursday night, and the AFL Fantasy Comp will be shut on Thursday night as well. So you've only got one more chance to join. Codes are in the bottom corner right now. Just go click the link down below to go join the tipping comp in the AFL Fantasy Comp. We've seen a lot of people show some great support over there, so make sure to join in on some fun, because the winners of both of those competitions will get a $100 gift voucher to the AFL store. And of course, with that, guys, we do have my brother's betting segment. He isn't here today, but he has recorded his betting segment. Make sure to go follow him over on Instagram as well, by the way, Jackpot Junkies. Always leave it linked in the description. He is doing other games like same game multis and other sort of bets and stuff around the footy season, so make sure to go check that out. But he's always bringing the Thursday night bet for us, because that is the game we live stream. So that's the game of the round for the channel, so to speak, even though the game this week isn't exactly a massive game. It's Carlton v Richmond. I wouldn't be surprised if it's not much of a flogging, but every single week, the Thursday night game first will be posted here on the podcast. So let's get into my brother's bets for Carlton v Richmond.
Same game multi for Thursday night football, Carlton v Richmond. First leg is Paddy Cripps for 25 disposals. Second leg is Adam Chera for 20 plus disposals. Third leg is Tom Lynch for a goal. And finally, Jesse Motlop for 2 goals, valued at $3.25. My certainty bet this week is Brisbane to win by more than 3 points, valued at $1.90. Now we get to my outside the boundary bet. This week I'm taking Ollie Wines to get 30 plus disposal, valued at $3.50. And as always, guys, gamble responsibly.
And finally, guys, before we end today's episode, I wanted to reveal my AFL fantasy team going into round 1. So there was a couple of games last week, but from my understanding, it doesn't really have an effect on anything AFL fantasy wise. This is my official team going into round 1. So
We'll go through the lines quickly, and then I'll go through a quick recap of the team at the end. Looking at my defense for AFL Fantasy to start off with, my premium players, Harry Sheezel, I've got Max Holmes. Then around mid-price players, I've got Matt Roberts, Harry Perryman, and Joel Frazier. And as my rookie, I've got Cleary from the Western Bulldogs. On the bench, I've got Zach Reed and James Leake. So I don't think there's too many question marks on my defense, to be honest. They're all pretty popular choices. Max Holmes, the fact that the game got postponed, they're going to be playing in round 3. There's no bye issue now. I was always going to start with Max Holmes, but that bye did have me question if I wanted to put him there. But now that bye is not an issue, I've always wanted to play Max Holmes in this team. I think he's going to be massive for the Cats this year. I think he's one of the highest averaging players last year for Geelong. And in that final series playing in the midfield, that's going to be his key role this year for the Cats. That's why I chucked him straight in the team as soon as I found out the news of the postponing of the Cats game. So that's why I've got him. I think the other three, Sheezel, Roberts and Perryman, are pretty self-explanatory. Joel Frazier looks like he's going to be taking a more advanced role in the defence for the Bulldogs this year. Had a great game against Hawthorn in their pre-season game. Scored 96, I believe. I think he's up for a good 80 average this year. Hence why I've got him in the team. I've been tossing and turning about maybe Sam DeConing, but his pre-season games haven't really impressed me as a sole ruck. So I'm going to keep that clear for now. That's one reason why maybe I wanted Geelong to play in that first game in opening round to get a good look at Sam DeConing and see how he goes. But with no real knowledge other than those preseason games and him not performing that well AFL fantasy-wise, I'm going to steer clear of DeConing for now. Now, Cleary may be the most surprising player from my team that people would be like, why have you got him in the team? I think he's going to get games early on for the Bulldogs. Their defence is pretty well decimated by injury, led by Liam Jones. Cleary seems to have a role that Joel Frazier had late last year. Played a couple of games for the Bulldogs last year, averaged 43 in the 2 games that he played. But in his preseason game against Hawthorn, scored 79. So I think this guy's going to get some games early on. He's priced around 330, and at this stage, I don't see anyone around that mark for price that is going to play consistently in the first couple of weeks. You've got players like Travalia and Bo Allen as the main choices for rookie prices. Travalia, I don't even know if he's going to play round 1, and Bo Allen's a lot of concern about injury and illness, so he may not play round 1. So hence why I've gone with Cleary in that spot at the moment. That will change if he's not selected for round 1 though. But I think he's going to be there, and I think he's going to be able to average a good 65, 70, hopefully, knock on wood, and I can keep him in the team for a while. He's only owned by 1.5%, so he is by far my biggest player of difference at this stage. In my rookies, I think are pretty self-explanatory. Zach Reed looks like he's going to play, as long as he doesn't get injured. For fuck's sake, please don't get injured, Zach Reed. You've always been around the mark of like, I want to pick you, but you are so bloody injury prone that you're never there. I want him. He's a basement price. Hopefully he can play some games this year, at least until like round 8 when I can get rid of him and he's bottomed out in price. But for now, please play games. And James Leake didn't have a great opening round performance, only scored 42. His job security isn't the greatest because he played forward, and obviously the Giants are missing a lot of forwards, Stringer and Hogan and even Jake Riccardi. So he may well get pushed out pretty quickly, but at this stage I've got James Leake as a defensive reserve. Moving into the midfield, I have got Dawson, Rosie, Will Ashcroft, Oliver, O'Driscoll, Lawler, Levi Ashcroft, Sid Draper, and on the bench I've got Finn O'Sullivan and Murphy Reed. My premiums at this stage are Jordan Dawson and Connor Rosie. Now, Connor Rosie looks like he's all good to go. Despite the injury concern in the preseason game, looks like he's fine, thank the Lord. Jordan Dawson, I think he's in for a massive year. Had a sort of down first half of last year, but then really improved in the second half of the year. And I think with Rory Laird going back, them bringing in a couple of recruits into their midfield core, I think that Jordan Dawson has to stand up as the captain, and I think he will. I think the Crows will be a much better team in 2025, hence why I think Jordan Dawson is my choice at this stage for the best premium pick at the moment. Connor Rosie looks good. I'm happy with that. Clayton Oliver, locking him in. Hopefully he has a good year. Will Ashcroft, I 100% had him as a lock until the last 2 weeks. His preseason games have been not the greatest. I'm sticking with him on the fact that looking at Will Day, didn't have the greatest preseason games, but when he played in opening round, he was brilliant. I think Will Ashcroft saving himself for the first real game. He doesn't seem like a player who gives a fuck about a practice game. Okay? Will Ashcroft's all about the main game. So I think that's where he's going to rise. I'm keeping him in at this stage. And the only other players I could really pick from at the moment are Finn Callahan and Will Day. And at this moment, with their buys, I'm steering clear of them for now. At that point, it kind of drops off. I've picked 4 players above 750, and the rest of them drop down, and I've got no other midfielders above 450. So Nathan O'Driscoll had 2 great preseason games. Scored 100 in the Indigenous All-Stars game and scored 85 in 3 quarters. I think this guy's going to play midfield this year for Fremantle. I think they're going to play Hayden Young up forward as much as they can because he's so lethal down there. And O'Driscoll does bring something a little bit different to the Fremantle midfield. So I think he's in there. I'm locking him in. Sam Lawler, he's already booked in for a round 1 debut. Josh Smiley not being there is a little bit disappointing. I was hoping he would be there, but he's been ruled out for a couple more weeks. Sam Lawler looks like he's shown some great signs. Number 1 pick. I'm giving him a go. Levi Ashcroft, I don't think there's much more that we need to say about him. He looks like he's primed. Sid Draper is a little bit of a concern. The Crows have been saying a lot of this preseason that, we're going to try and hold off on him. So I'm just waiting on Sid Draper. I think that if he plays, he's going to be good, but we have to wait and see. He had a couple of good preseason games when he was playing, but he didn't even play the second half. He didn't even play the first half against Brisbane, but he had a really good second half against the Lions. So hopefully he does play. And then on the reserves, Finn O'Sullivan, he's been confirmed to be debuting round 1 for North. And Murphy Reid, at this stage, looks like he's going to be debuting round 1 for the Dockers, hence why I've picked him as well. Now in the ruck, it's a pretty easy one. Tristan Cherry and Tom De Koning. I've picked them 2 because they seem to be the ones to go. Tom De Koning looks like he's a sole ruck role now that Pidnet is out for the first couple of weeks. And Tristan Cherry, I think I should go with the premium ruck at this moment. He didn't have a great match simulation, but his preseason game proved why he was so good last year. Massive around the ground, a good marker, gets disposals, clearances, dominates in the ruck. The only other one I could maybe think of in the ruck is Max Gawn, and that's because they're playing the Giants this week, and we saw how well Darcy Cameron did when Briggs went down. Briggs won't be there this week as well. So Max Gawn, maybe. I may tinker with that. And the reserve for the ruck is Harry Boyd, pretty self-explanatory. I don't know if Marshall's going to play, but if he doesn't, Boyd's right there ready to go. And finally, the forward line. I've got Jason Horne-Francis, McRae, Riley Sanders, Bailey Smith, Caleb Daniel, Hugo Garcia. And on the bench, I've got Connor Stone, Sam Davidson, and my utility at the moment is Isaac Kako. So Horne-Francis, massive preseason he's had. He's dominated both preseason games for Port Adelaide, almost injured his captain as well. So he's been all over the place, but Jason Horne-Francis looks like he's locked in that midfield, especially with Butters being out. I'm locking him in. Isaac Rankin I did look at a little bit because he had a really good game against Brisbane, but I'm going to go with Horne-Francis at the moment. McRae, self-explanatory. Looks like he has the role that he should have had at the Bulldogs. Same with Caleb Daniel. Riley Sanders, with all the injuries to the Bulldogs, he will get games in the midfield, and he had a really good game against Hawthorn. Pretty decent game in their first match sim way back against Essendon. Bailey Smith, I don't think there's much we really need to say. And Hugo Garcia looks like he's looks like to be in the midfield core for the Saints early this year, which is good to see. Only priced at 414 forward mid. I'm picking him as my 6th forward at this moment in time. A lot of people have been putting him as like a midfielder, but I just think that if he's a midfield forward, I feel like I can mess around with a couple of rookies in the midfield. I think that if you got a forward mid that's, going to be playing predominantly midfield this year for St Kilda, at least in the early stages, I think you lock him in the forward line, because the forward line at this moment, I think if you can keep a player like a Davidson and a Stone on the reserves list, and if they can gain points quickly, I think that's a lot better in my opinion. So Davidson, if he doesn't debut round 1, I'd be very shocked. I think that he deserves it, considering how good a game he had in that preseason game against Hawthorn, scored 102. I think he's a lock. Connor Stone didn't have a great game against Collingwood, only scored 50, but I do think that his role is good, playing off that halfback role. I think he's going to be okay and has a little bit of job security at the moment, but if he is taken out of that round 1 team, see you later. And finally, Isaac Kako, his job security is almost cement solid at the moment, because unless he gets injured, he is a lock for that Essendon forward line, because my God, now that Peter Wright's out injured as well, they're relying on him and Caddy for goals. So Isaac Kako, he's already been confirmed for a debut in round 1. I'm putting him in as a utility sub at the moment because he's a forward mid, but he could easily get into the team very early on if he plays well. So I have to wait and see. But we'll quickly recap my AFL Fantasy team, my final team going into round 1. In defence, I have Harry Sheasel, Max Holmes, Matt Roberts, Harry Perryman, Joel Frazier, and Cleary. In my midfield, I have Jordan Dawson, Connor Rosie, Will Ashcroft, Clayton Oliver, O'Driscoll, Lawler, Levi Ashcroft, and Sid Draper. In the ruck, I have Tristan Cherry and Tom de Koning. Forward line is Jason Orne-Francis, Jack McRae, Riley Sanders, Bailey Smith, Caleb Daniel, and Hugo Garcia. And on the bench, defence, Zach Reed and James Leake. Midfield, Finn O'Sullivan and Murphy Reed. Ruck is Harry Boyd. Forward line is Connor Stone and Sam Davidson. And the utility sub is Isaac Kako. And finally, guys, just on the AFL fantasy stuff, we are going to be actually doing the review of our AFL Fantasy Team, me and my brother, every single week on the podcast channel. So if you do want to follow the AFL Fantasy stuff throughout the rest of the year, we'll be recapping the Fantasy Channel ladder every single week as well, recapping our teams, the best parts and the worst parts of the team throughout the week. If that interests you, then make sure to go follow on the podcast channel, because we'll be leaving a clip of the review of our AFL Fantasy teams every single week over there. But guys, that is all we have for this episode of the Boundary Riders podcast, episode 104. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. If you did enjoy it, make sure to like and subscribe over on YouTube. And if you are on Spotify, make sure to leave us 5 stars and make sure to follow so you're notified on the podcast and the review every single week. But again, guys, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and we'll catch you all next week.